All right, well, we're going to go ahead and welcome our next presenters. We have Kathryn Mahan and Yannayon with the New Mexico Forest and Watershed Restoration Institute, talking about how our forests are recovering after HPCC. Thank you. And again, please save any questions for afterward. Sorry.
All right, hi, I'm Emily. I'm the monitoring specialist with the Institute. I help train and manage the crews, and I write the reports on our monitoring data, some of which we're going to present here. I grew up in Minnesota, and I've been living in New Mexico since 2020, working in various locations and landscapes across the state.
My name is Kathryn Mahan. I have lived here since high school. I lost my home in the Hermits Peak fire before it became Hermits Peak Calf Canyon, and I manage the Ecological Monitoring program at the New Mexico Forest and Watershed Restoration Institute and have been working there for several years. Okay, so as we mentioned, we work for the New Mexico Forest and Watershed Restoration Institute. We work in, can you hear us okay? Beautiful. We work in the fire and monitoring programs. Our organization has been around since 2005. We're based at New Mexico Highlands University by congressional direction. We are funded by Congress, the state, and various grants and agreements. We're one of 3 Southwest Ecological Restoration Institutes, and that number is soon to change to 5. We've been doing ecological monitoring since 2005. And we have long and short-term sites all over the state, even a little bit in Colorado and Arizona. We employ students, recent graduates, and others who love working outside and have excellent attention to detail. If that sounds like you, check out our table for job postings. We had 500 of our 2,500 long-term plots burned over in the 2022 Hermits Peak Calf Canyon wildfire, and that has given us the opportunity to collect data on wildfire response. We have data on those projects going back to 2007, and then since the fire, we've remeasured 300 of those 500 plots.
All right, so the stars on this map represent our monitoring projects where we have plots and we have been collecting data. And then, of course, most of you have probably seen this is the RAVG/CBI, that's the Rapid Assessment of Vegetation Condition and Composite Burn Index. Unfortunately, this is actually not all that accurate to what we're seeing on the ground. It shows that many of the areas that are supposedly low severity or unaffected, that we see that there's actually pretty high and severe fire effects on the ground. So we can display these results in a different way.
So these maps are looking at the changes in the normalized difference vegetation index. This comes from remote sensing, but basically the darker green, the more vegetation, healthier the vegetation is. So you can see on the left what the burn scar looked like before the fire and then how it's been recovering. You start to see some of that green showing back up in 2024, and that's mainly herbaceous recovery, not necessarily overstory trees. So we'd like to take you into what this looks like on the ground in the forest. So in this photo, one of these pictures is from May, right, when the fire was still burning, and then the other is from 2 years later. So one of the kind of common themes that we're seeing, and that I'm sure everyone has seen, is this delayed mortality. So not all of the trees that are dying died during the fire. Scourge, fire injury, and drought conditions resulted in delayed mortality. To kind of better visualize this, we've been working on a Green Islands product with the Natural Resources Ecology Lab up at CSU. And partners like New Mexico Forestry Division also have Green Islands products, and they do aerial surveys and publish annual reports on the state of the forest in New Mexico. So we encourage you to check those out.
So another cause of delayed mortality, in addition to just general fire and heat stress, is bark beetles and other pest insects. So these are natural decay agents. They are always there, they're always present, they're always feeding on the nice sugary starches inside trees. But if a tree is already stressed from fire, these beetles can cause additional mortality. And that goes for other infestations that we've seen across the West in recent years, including the Douglas fir, tussock moth, and spruce budworm and other things of that sort. So we're going to get into, in the forest, what survived and why those things may have survived. So in our region and through the burn scar, we see a certain continuum of habitats. So this is just a really nice diagram from a Forest Service document that shows the continuum of habitats we have. Mostly we're going to talk about ponderosa pine forests, which are more fire adapted, and then mixed conifer forests, which are less adapted to fire. So you can go to the next one. So this is what a ponderosa pine forest looks like. It is more well adapted to fire because of that thick bark there on that left-hand photo. And we traditionally in ponderosa pine forests see less fuels on the ground because there's frequent fire. The trees can survive the fire, and so trees are more well spaced out. Here, this tree, we see Douglas fir. You see how the bark is so much thinner. Douglas fir is not as resistant to fire because that bark is not insulating it. And so, essentially, in mixed conifer forest, we see much denser vegetation, and that fire may travel more quickly and be more severe in a mixed conifer forest, and therefore less trees will survive.
Because we've had so many long-term study sites burned over, we had the opportunity to look at differences in treatment types. So we're looking at areas that received no treatment, areas that were thinned, and areas that were thinned and had prescribed fire before the Hermit's Peak Canyon fire burned through. What we're seeing on average is that in untreated mixed conifer, you have a mean overstory survival rate, so that's the trees, of 13%. In untreated ponderosa pine, we're looking at 34% survival. This is just a photo series, so this is an example of untreated mixed conifer before the fire and after. This is thinned, this is pre-thinning, but this is what we're going to show you. The next photo series is thinned ponderosa pine, which averaged a survival rate of 38%. Thinned only mixed conifer averaged a survival rate of 39%. So this is going to show you what the forest looked like before the thinning. This is after the thinning. This is immediately after the fire. And then this is showing some of that understory herbaceous recovery after the fire. We can do the same thing with the thinned and burned mixed conifer. So this was thinned and saw prescribed fire before the Hermit's Peak Canyon fire. So this is right before the fire, and this is right after the fire. And the survival rates that we're seeing there are around 58% of the overstory canopy in mixed conifer and 64% in ponderosa. And this is just a graph representing those numbers that I just gave you, so you can see the difference between thinning and prescribed fire and untreated sites in the different forest types after the Hermit's Peak Canyon fire. Another way that we can kind of visualize this is by looking at the burn severity and the way that that's distributed among the different groups. And so you can see that in both forest types, sites that had been treated with prescribed fire and thinning before the Hermit's Peak Canyon fire had the lowest proportion burn at high severity.
So we've talked about what remains after the flames. Now we're going to talk about the things that we see growing back within the burn scar. This graph shows the density of stems per acre for these different functional groups. We have conifers, we see the least of those so far, resprouting deciduous trees, and then shrubs, we see the highest density of. Go to the next one. This is just showing some of the shrub density. The shrubs that we see coming back are wild rose, kinnikinnick, and then raspberry and thimbleberry, which are my favorites to find out in the field. We see these at approximately 9,500 stems per acre, but up to 83,000 stems per acre of these really dense shrubs. Some of these are resprouting from underground roots, and then others are germinating from seed. And then resprouting deciduous trees, we are mostly seeing Gamble oak and aspen. So these, a lot of the rootstocks are able to survive the fire, and then they are rapidly resprouting right after the fire. And this is really crucial because they don't have to germinate from seed, and they can play a really important role in stabilizing the fire, stabilizing soil immediately after the fire. We see these at about 700 stems per acre. And additionally, I would like to mention that these deciduous trees and shrubs are important for conifer regeneration because our conifers, our ponderosa pines that we really love, they need nurse shrubs when they're really, really tiny because these shrubs and these deciduous trees are going to help protect them from sun, wind, and herbivores as well. So we are starting to see some conifer regeneration. We see approximately 40 per acre, but some plots we measured had up to 230 stems per acre. And here we see a ponderosa pine seedling growing out of a ponderosa pine stump, and then also a little Douglas fir seedling in one of our plots. So this past summer, we also started documenting recovery of understory plant species. So this is mostly our herbaceous flowering plants, our grasses. We documented 216 unique species across our 12 plots that we monitored. And the max number of species on one plot, that is 1/10 of an acre, we found 80 species in 1/10 of an acre. And the good thing is that majority of these species are native and they are long-lived perennials, so they're going to be around for a while, providing food and shelter for animals, soil stability, aquifer recharge, all of those wonderful things.
We also have preliminary results on mistletoe prevalence. So I think most folks are familiar with mistletoe. It's a parasitic plant that can cause brooming, potentially mortality if the infection is severe enough. And mistletoe prevalence in the area of the Hermits Peak Calf Canyon fire reduced by approximately half compared to pre-fire conditions.
All right, so this is just another photo series from one of our plots that remained untreated before the wildfire. And we see that, of course, wildfire effects, even in our untreated areas, serve to reduce fuels. If you could advance that. So we have a ton of fuels, bunch of dead trees, bunch of dead limbs on the ground, but immediately post-fire, all those fuels are gone. So the wildfire did serve to reduce some of the hazardous fuels in the burn scar.
So to wrap up this talk, we'd like to talk about what comes next, maybe what to expect on the larger scale. So the first thing, I think we're all aware, snags are particularly susceptible to wind throw at this particular time. Research shows that 3 to 4 years after wildfire is when most fire-killed trees come down. And obviously this is presenting concerns for access and safety for all of us who live and work in the burn scar. But it does help to accelerate decay of the logs when they come down and they're in contact with the ground. That can put nutrients back into the ecosystem. As Emily mentioned earlier, we are all interested in knowing what's happening with the conifers. Are the ponderosa and the Doug fir coming back? And so we began documenting new conifer seedlings showing up on our long-term sites starting in the fall of 2024, with more detected in 2025. But they're really difficult to see. That's the size of the seedlings that we're seeing out there right now. So there may be some that were actually out there that we were not able to pick up. This is just an example of what it looks like to try to find the conifer seedlings on a plot.
All right, so just talking a little bit more about those deciduous trees. If you've been out in burn scar, you can see that there are tons of aspen coming up. The max density of aspen we had was 5,500 stems per acre. And we expect this to go down because aspen populations are able to self-thin. So the weaker stems, the ones that aren't growing as fast, are going to die. They're going to decay as the larger, more well-adapted stems are able to grow up. So we're going to expect to see that density to kind of decrease. And then I also would like to mention the importance of oaks in the burn scar. You also have a high density of oak regeneration, and oaks are keystone species. Gamble oak, the most common species in the burn scar, can produce 500 to 625 pounds of acorns per acre, which feed an abundance of wildlife, some of which are delicious to hunt and eat. And then also oaks play host to a bunch of insect species, and some insect species only feed on oaks, and those in addition feed a lot of wildlife species. All right, if you'd like to learn more, here are some additional resources. Our table is right over there. We have a bunch of resources to pick up, and we can also point you towards our website where those resources are. And then here's our contact information. Are there any questions?
All right, thank you, Kathryn and Emily, for that great presentation. If there are no questions,